Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to my special 2,000 subscriber episode of Tales from a Retro Gamer. I did recently hit 2,000 subs on YouTube. I really appreciate that, guys. So thank all of you for watching, liking, subscribing, sharing, and all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. To celebrate, I want to talk about sort of a history of NES books, books about the Nintendo Entertainment System, in particular reference books for the console, books that are about the games themselves. And I want to talk about what was the first complete NES guidebook, the first complete NES reference book. Now, before I get to that, very briefly, thank you Old School Gamer Magazine for backing this episode, for sponsoring this episode. I really appreciate it. And now for a brief word from Tim Kitzrow, the voice of NBA Jam, about Old School Gamer Magazine.
Old School Gamer covers arcade and retro gaming, gives you gaming history, and it lets you know what conventions are happening. Issues come out once every other month. Plus, a website full of even more, and it's all for just $30 a year. Visit oldschoolgamer.com and subscribe now.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Now, let's get to it. So in 1985, when the NES was released in the US, was test marketed in the US, the video game magazine industry was pretty much dead in the US. The great video game crash of 1983, in addition to crashing the console industry, the video game magazine industry crashed with it. There were virtually no video game magazines being published in the US between 1985 and 1987. During, those first few years of the NES, you basically couldn't read reviews in the US about those early Nintendo games, except for there was a newsletter called Computer Entertainer, which was really the only contemporary review of Super Mario Brothers and a bunch of other early NES games, in the English language. So it's hard to think of today, when a new game comes out for a popular console, just a big AAA title, there's reviews all over the place. Imagine these early NES games like Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, having no reviews to read. And, until Nintendo Power came out a little later, and then these books I'm going to be talking about came out, between 85 and 87, very little in the way of writing about the NES. Now, in 1987, there was a book called How to Win at Super Mario Brothers, and in the late 80s and early 90s, as the NES got more and more popular, books did start coming out for the console, and I want to show you a few today leading up to what was the first complete NES reference guide. So very briefly, I want to show you a few of these. One of the more comprehensive books I have is put out by Video Games and Computer Entertainment. It's called Complete Guide to Nintendo Video Games, and it was published in 1990. That was the first edition, and it's in color. It has screenshots and everything, so pretty nice production. Most books from this time about video games were in black and white, and a lot of them didn't have screenshots, or at least not color ones, and it rates the sound, graphics, playability, violence, and overall ratings, and you get a lot of titles, and they're divided up into genres and everything. Pretty nice book and fairly complete, but of course, while this book was coming out, more NES titles were being published, so it was outdated as soon as it came out, because more NES games kept coming out. There were NES games in productions, through 1995, but that's a cool book. Many of you have the official Nintendo Player's Guide from 1988, and that one's obviously not comprehensive. These early books, pretty much none of them are comprehensive, but a lot of them are pretty neat. I'm glad to have them in my collection. And for some reason, I don't have the official Nintendo Player's Guide to show you guys, but you can see it on the screen here. Maybe it's around here somewhere. It's such a ubiquitous book, but I've got quite a few. There's Top Secret Passwords, Nintendo Player's Guide. A lot of these books like this, very nicely illustrated, did have tips, tricks, and that kind of thing. And Nintendo Strategies, How to Win It, Bases Loaded, Blaster Master, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Again, these are very nicely illustrated. Let's see. NES Game Atlas, Player's Guide. And this one even has like maps and things. Adventures of Link, very nice. But again, not comprehensive, not like a full list of games or anything like that. Some of these bigger books, the ones I referenced earlier with the black and white, let's see, images are few and far between in here, but there are some. You know, you got some black and white screenshots. A lot of these books that were published apart from Nintendo, you know, without their approval, are black and white. But this is a nice thick book, and it's got tips, tricks, techniques. It's got reviews, like it says, Capcom's excellent programming and graphics team has created another Disney arcade adventure for kids, referring to Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. So there are reviews, and it says how many players, how many continues, what controller it uses, whether it has pause or not. So pretty nice, you know, nice thick book here. Again, not comprehensive though, like all these early books. Compute's Guide to Nintendo Games. Again, you've got black and white, and this one, again, with a lot of the stats and data here, and reviews, and tips, tricks, strategies, and on and on. Beyond the Nintendo Masters, the advanced guide for serious Nintendo gamers. It says it covers top games and has power play strategies. Ultimate Exodus, there's a little, give you a little idea of what this book is like. Talks about strategies, it talks about fighting in the game, and it goes through, and each chapter for each book game is several pages long. Like there's the beginning for Shadowgate, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 pages for Shadowgate. So, and on the back there it tells you what high octane games it covers. And you got Compute's Guide to Nintendo Adventure Games, so that talks about a specific genre, again in black and white. Now this is a really interesting book, Pop and Play. Now many of you know that when you rented games back in the day, it would not come with the instruction manual. Number one, because people would keep the instruction manual or lose it, people that would rent the game, and of course they wouldn't return the instruction manual back with the game. Also, Nintendo sued to keep places from like Blockbuster from including the instruction manual with the game, and they won. And so Blockbuster and other rental outlets would like have these printed cards with real simple instructions, and they would include either cards or stickers on the games or on the game case or whatever. Well, because or when you bought used games, oftentimes they didn't come with instruction manuals. So Pop and Play has over 200 user-friendly Nintendo game instructions, keys to Nintendo mastery. So over 200 games. That's a lot of games for the NES, and again, not all of them, because there were over twice that many games published for the NES. And this came out in, let's see, 1990. So again, a lot more games were published after this. But for 1990, this is pretty comprehensive. And as you can see here, it's all black and white, and there are no photos or anything. But it's got the instructions: player control, control pad, A button, B button, start button, select button, what the buttons do, what items to collect, hints and techniques, and all that kind of stuff. So pretty useful book for game players. You know, if you bought a bunch of games at a garage sale or flea market, or if you traded a bunch with your friends, or you rented a game with no manual, very convenient book for gamers back in the day. Now you can look all this stuff up online, but that was a really super useful book back then. And then you get into these ultimate unauthorized Nintendo classic game strategies, and these were nicely produced, well written, again in black and white. And there were a number of these kinds of books in this series, and I'm starting to get a pile over here. Secrets of the Games, Russell DeMaria. Now he contributed some stories to my Super Nintendo books. Good guy. He wrote that book, and he's well known for writing the video game strategy guys. Great guy. And the very popular How to Win at Nintendo Games by Jeff Rovin. I believe these started around 88 or 89. Very, very, very popular. You still see these around here and there at used bookstores and at gaming conventions pretty frequently. Pretty cool series of books. So let's get closer to our topic of what was the first complete NES reference book. The Digital Press Collector's Guide number 5, which is this book, came out in 2002. Now, it's the if you don't know the Digital Press guys, like Joe Santulli, He is one of the founders of the National Video Game Museum in Frisco. He was part of the very instrumental with the digital press website. I believe he started that. And just a really important guy with gaming history, preserving history. And he is the publisher of the digital press guides. Now, these were a big influence on my work. Now, this 5th edition was the first to include the 8-bit NES. Because if you go through here, it says what's been added to this guide since issue number 4. And it says what's been done since issue 4. And it said there's a new section for Nintendo 8-bit cartridges. Now, earlier editions covered Atari, ColecoVision, and television, that kind of stuff. But I believe this was the first to list every NES game for the console. Now, technically, you could look at this as the very first completely comprehensive NES book, because it does list every NES game. And it has the publisher. Let's go to the NES chapter here. Now see, it lists US game releases, and it has the title, and it has a little box where you can check it off, like say it's in your collection. And some of the games have write-ups. Now some of them don't. Now each one says the publisher, and it has the rarity rating, and it was a price guide as well, so it'll tell you the value, which those values are way out of date now. But it's a great, I still use some of these guides to just check off the games that I have in my collection. So it's pretty neat for that. And some of you may not consider this the first complete NES reference book because a lot of the games only have the title. But throughout, you'll see a few do have write-ups. Like, for example, the very first game in here, 10-Yard Fight. It says based on the 1983 IRM coin-op. And it says, like the Dallas Cowboys, it's either love or hate here. Looks like football, but it's really all about breaking tackles. In the arcade, you did that by jerking the stick left and right. Imagine attempting to do that on a standard NES joypad. Actually, even a joystick doesn't help much. The gameplay is frustratingly simplistic. More aggravation. You can be intercepted by an opponent just 1 pixel away when you're passing to a man way downfield. Memories of Joe Pisarcik abound. Now, those are called the Cycle File. Joe Santulli wrote those. So he wrote write-ups for some of the games. And you can see there's some box art and screenshots and things like that as well. So this can be considered the first complete NES guidebook. But as far as having a write-up for every game, it was very sporadic here. Now, in 2002, Digital Press upgraded with Collector's Guide edition number 7. And there's my sticker here to remind me that it was 2002. I was supposed to take that off before the video began. But anyway, as you can see listed, it's a really cool book, very comprehensive in terms of listing the titles for all these classic systems, including the NES. And these Digital Press books were very influential on my work. So skipping to the NES chapter, once again, you've got lists of games. And see, I check off the ones I have in my collection and that kind of thing. And it does have more write-ups this time. But quite a few write-ups, in fact. But again, a lot of the games just have the title and the year and maybe just like one sentence, like based on like Cybernoid, based on the Commodore 64 shooter of the same name, and then it has the release date, and that's it. So it's not really comprehensive in terms of write-ups, but it does have a number of write-ups, quite a few in fact, throughout. But it's not completely comprehensive in terms of write-ups, but it's a great book, and I've relied on this heavily, as far as, just for my collection, and it was an inspiration in writing my books, which we'll get to right now. Now, the first NES book to have a full write-up for every single game released in the US was the hardcover edition of my book, Classic Home Video Games, 1985 through 1988. Now, this was published in 2009, and the first edition, the hardcover, is out of print, but the softcover edition is still in print. It came out a couple of years or so after the hardcover edition, and this has been in print ever since. And here's the NES chapter that takes up most of the book. There's, as you can see by the cover, there's the Atari 7800, the Sega Master System, in addition to the NES, which is the majority of the book since there are so many more NES games for it. And, you know, there's some photography, some boxes and cartridges, and, you know, some of the pages don't have any photos. But there is a, you know, decent sized write-up for every single game. So technically this is the first NES book to feature every single game released in the US market to have a full write-up for each game. And so technically that's it. And I'm not, I guess you could say I'm tooting my own horn, but I'm going through, you know, just the era, just being honest with you guys. This was the first, the hardcover edition of this was the first comprehensive NES guidebook. Now, some people are confused by the cover dates, and I totally understand that. With McFarlane Publishers, they wanted me to cover each era of console. So like classic home video games, this is the first book in the series, 1972 through 1984. The consoles that were released during that time period, console release date. But within each book, each system has every game, you know, for that system released in the US, every game for the library. And so this cuts off at 88 because the Sega Genesis TurboGrafx and Neo Geo came out in 1989. So every console that was released between 85 and 88, what consoles were released during that time period? Well, there were three, the Master System, 7800, and NES. So those three consoles are featured in here, but they have every single game for the NES released, you know, all the original titles, including the unlicensed stuff that was released between 1985 and 1995. So the Classic Home Video Games book was the first comprehensive NES guidebook in that sense to have write-ups for every game. Now, moving forward, we are getting to the Ultimate Nintendo Guide to the NES Library by Pat Contri. Now, one reason I mention this book, in addition to the fact that it is a comprehensive NES guidebook, is that I have 60 reviews in here. Now, many of you may not know that when Pat wrote his book, he farmed out a lot of the reviews to other writers. One is, see, he wrote over 400 of the reviews and reflections in this book. Ian Ferguson, his podcast partner, wrote the second most. I don't remember how many, but he wrote quite a few. I think probably 150 something. And then I was third on the list, and then there were probably 3 or 4 other writers. But I wrote over 60 reviews in this book. And just to give you a little background on that, I met Pat Contri back in 2010, I believe it was, at the Screw Attack Game Convention near the DFW airport in the Dallas area. And I met him, and I wasn't really that familiar with the whole video game YouTube culture at that point. Pat wasn't really very well known by then, but the Angry Video Game Nerd was pretty popular at that point, and he was at that show. But I hadn't heard of him until the Screw Attack Game Convention because I really wasn't paying. I watched some YouTube, you know, video game stuff, but I really wasn't into the whole culture of it and, you know, the comedians and all that kind of stuff. Angry Video Game Nerd in particular, you know, he's pretty well known at that point, but it's just not something I paid attention to. And if I had heard of him, it was just in the periphery of my mind, and I just really, I'm not sure if I'd seen any of his videos or not at that point, but as far as I remember, the Screw Attack Game Convention is when, you know, there were several in the Dallas area over the years, and I went to all of them, and it was a super fun show. And, you know, it was just like a big weekend-long party. It kind of reminded me like a video game frat kind of thing or something. It was a crazy show, much different than other gaming conventions, but it was a lot of fun. But anyway, I met Pat, and I had a booth set up there, and I was selling copies of Classic Home Video Games 85 through 88, and I was selling some of my other stuff and games and stuff. And he came up to the table, and he was flipping through it. And he said, hey, I've been thinking about, you know, writing a NES book for a long time. And he was saying, but I was, you know, wanting to write one, you know, with screenshots and full color photography and all that stuff, you know, something more elaborate production-wise. And I was talking to him about it and stuff, and that was pretty neat. It was cool to meet, you know, I didn't know who he was, and he didn't know who I was. And some people have thought, you know, Pat copied you with his book, or I copied him or whatever. None of that's true. Both of us were inspired by Leonard Maltin's movie and video guide, you know, that has little capsule reviews of thousands and thousands of movies. We both had that in mind for video games. And I was inspired by Leonard Herman's ABC to the VCS, which was written way before any other, you know, comprehensive guidebook to any console. And I don't know if Pat had heard of Leonard Herman at that time, but regardless, Pat and I were independently influenced, and neither one of us copied the other. We just both loved video games and both loved the NES, and we both wrote comprehensive guidebooks. And so anyway, so after that screw attack, we became friends, and we were contacting each other, and he asked me if I wanted to write some reviews for his book. And I was super flattered by that, and he had me submit some samples and just to do some write-ups, and that was very cool. I thought that was awesome. I was really excited when the book got published, and if you look in the Ultimate Nintendo Guide to the NES Library, you will see the about the author. It has Pat's bio, and it has my bio as well, and the bios of the other contributors. And that's in the first edition of this book, and I believe it's in the second edition as well. But much to my surprise, when the third edition of the Ultimate Nintendo Guidebook came out, I guess he had sold out of a couple of printings or whatever. I'm not sure how he does it, but anyway, he came out with a new edition that's pretty much the same book, except in the when he was, marketing it, it said 60 completely all new, completely rewritten reviews. Well, I thought, well, that's interesting. 60 new reviews. I thought, okay, I think I wrote about 60 in there. So anyway, so when the book came out, I noticed all my reviews had been taken out of the book. Now that's perfectly fine. It's Pat's book. He can do with it what he wants. And I guess maybe he just wanted a separation since I was doing so many video game books, and since I come out with the Omnibus. Maybe he just wanted some separation or whatever. Since he's an author and I'm an author, he wanted, whatever the case, he took all my reviews out of his book. And I just wanted to let you guys know, because for some conventions that I've done in the past, on my bio, one of the things I'd put on there was that I had contributed some reflections and reviews to his NES book, and I didn't want people picking up the third edition, looking through it and say, wait a minute, Brett's not in here. Why did he say that? Well, that's why. So if you have a first or second edition, I believe, of the book, definitely the first edition, you'll see 60 of my reviews in there. And the way you'll know is at the very bottom of the reflection, see the way he has it, there's a paragraph of the review, and then reflections, which is like, just memories of the games or whatever. You'll see a little BW, or you'll see a PC, Brett Weiss or Pat Country or whoever wrote that review and reflection. So that's how you'll know that. It doesn't have everybody's name all throughout, so it's kind of subtle. Some people, if they're not looking at it real close, may have thought Pat wrote every single, synopsis or review of every game, but just look for the initials there. That's how you know. So I guess if you have a first edition of the book, it's a little bit of a collector's item now, because the third edition is different and has 60 different reviews. So anyway, Pat and I were friends for a decade or so there. Haven't heard much from him lately, but we do see each other at conventions from time to time. But anyway, so that was 2016. That's when Pat's book came out. And the year before that, the Complete NES officially licensed U.S. releases, that book came out from Jeffrey Wittenhagen, and it's got very brief synopses of these games. He calls himself a minimalist writer, and it's got a box art and a screenshot of each game. And Pat and Jeff's books are self-published. They do them themselves. A lot of work designing them and things. So that's that book. And anyway, there you go. That was 2015. So Jeff beat Pat to the punch by a year. And my first NES book, Complete NES book, came out in 2009. And then the digital press one came out, years and years before that. So anyway, that's sort of a history of NES books. In the last few years, quite a few NES books have been published just in the last couple of years. Like when the NES Classic came out, there were books specifically for that. There's some NES encyclopedias and other books that are comprehensive. All right, so there you go. That is just sort of a brief history of NES books, including what I consider to be the first NES reference books, depending on what you're talking about, just listings of the games or complete write-ups for the games or whatever. There you go. Now later this year in December, my next NES book will be published, the NES Omnibus Volume 1, A through L. This is, yes, a comprehensive guide to the NES from A through L, and then it's a sequel to my Super NES Omnibus books, and the part 2 of the NES Omnibus will be out in the spring of next year, and you can pre-order the NES Omnibus Volume 1 now. I will put a link in the description. All right, guys, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments, What is your favorite NES book, or what NES books have you read and enjoyed? I'd really appreciate it. All right, thank you for watching this video. Thank you for 2,000 subscribers. I really, really appreciate it. We will talk to you in the next video.